afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the May AFT Book Club. My name is Mary Catherine Ricker, and I am Executive Director of the Albert Shanker Institute, and we are privileged partners with AFT and Share My Lesson in hosting the AFT Book Club. We are so excited you've been able to join us tonight for a book talk with Randi Weingarten and Ali Velshi to talk about small acts of courage. This is going to be a dynamic, engaging book talk, and we're really excited you could join us. And we're so excited that Randi is going to be able to talk with Ali tonight. When you joined us, you were able to see a video that showed you how to use Share My Lesson. We look forward to you plugging questions into the Q&A, and we'll keep an eye on those and get to as many questions as we can. We look forward to finding out who you are by using the chat feature and putting your name and where you're tuning into to view this tonight. And we are also looking forward to getting a couple answers from you with our poll questions. So before I hand it off to Randi, let's practice that first poll question so you get an idea of what to do. So we'll put up that first poll question and ask for you to take a look at what is your favorite thing about spring? And what you do is you click on the answer. So is it A, that there are flowers blooming? Is it B, that there is snow melting? Is it C, that there are allergies? Or D, that baseball season is starting? Take a moment and tell us, if you can, in the chat, why you picked the letter that you picked, whether it was the flowers blooming, snow melting, for those of us who experience lots of snow in the winter, allergies, which I experience, but I would never choose as my favorite thing about spring, or baseball season starting. And feel free to put in the chat who your favorite team is, or who you think is going to win the pennant race this fall. But not to get too ahead of ourselves, thinking about fall already, let's just do a quick snapshot of who put what. All right, we have got an overwhelming victory of flowers blooming, followed up with baseball season starting. Fantastic. Well, welcome to everybody. And let's jump into our book club, because like I promised, it is going to be dynamic.
Mary Catherine, that you said snow melting. You can tell you're from Minnesota. That you would say that in May.
Anyone in the Great Lakes region is probably feeling some camaraderie right now, right?
Yes.
From Duluth through to Buffalo.
And our Canadian friend who was with us today. But we do see that in the chat, somebody from Lowell, Massachusetts, where, by the way, I was this week, is finally warming up, and you're seeing the flowers. Same as Philadelphia and Indiana. And I guess that's Anderson, Indiana. Fantastic. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mary Catherine.
No, outstanding. I love that we're jumping right in. And if there are some folks joining us who don't know, I am thrilled to be able to pass the conversation off to Randi Weingarten. Randi is the president of the AFT. She also is the board president of the Albert Shanker Institute, longtime friend and longtime president of the AFT. Before AFT, she was president of the UFT in New York City. And she is just an incredible labor leader, teacher, and you're soon to hear writer. So Randi, I'm going to pass it off to you because I know this conversation with Ali is going to be wonderful. And thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, Mary Catherine, and thank you, Kelly, and thank you for, and I want to thank our very, very, very special guest, Ali Velshi, who, you know, for those of you who watch MSNBC, he has one of the most compelling shows, I think, on all of TV, and I frankly try never to miss it, although he's on a lot, thankfully, so I don't see it all the time anymore. But he has written this remarkable book. If you remember anything else, remember Small Acts of Courage. You know, in some ways, in the Talmud, we understand that, you know, none of us can do everything, but all of us are really told or compelled to do something. And the book, Small Acts of Courage, I don't know if people can see it, really is just, I mean, it is a love story to democracy and to, idealism and to freedom and to fighting against the odds. And a lot of it is your life story and your family's life story. But this whole notion, Ali, of that small acts of courage coming out right now and fighting for democracy right now, it really is incredibly special. And I'm just really grateful that we can have you on, both to thank you for all the reporting you've done. I mean, the reporting you did, I know we're at the anniversary, the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd, the reporting that you did from Minneapolis during that period of time was not just compelling, it was urgent. And you were out there. In some ways, we felt like we were right with you. But it's been the reporting you did from Ukraine and the reporting you've done from so many other places. You just go out and make sure that those of us who are listening to you are seeing you. You are telling us the story of what you are seeing through the eyes of a very, very wise person. So, more than anything else, I just also want to say thank you for being you. Thank you for being a journalist. Thank you for being a reporter. And thank you for having those small acts of courage each and every day.
Well, thank you for that, Randy, and it's great to be with you, my friend. And this book came out, before this election and the moment that we're in, and it's not just an American moment, right? We're in a moment around the world in which extremism trumps moderation, where ignorance challenges knowledge, where news comes at a velocity that people can't process, the brain can't process. Maybe AI can, but my brain can't. And it
No,
sort of makes teachers, by the way, that much more important, because you can't just rush through everything in life. You can't have a hot take on everything. We actually have to slow down and say, how do I comprehend this world that I'm in? And how do I not, feel hopeless? And, since you're quoting from scripture, let's go all the way. Small acts of courage is sort of a take on the Jewish scripture, the idea of tikkun olam, right?
exactly
You're not
right.
fixing the whole world. Your job is not to fix the whole world. Your job is to fix something, to help
Yes.
somebody, to raise somebody, to make somebody smarter, to engage in some conversation, to clean something up. And I think that when you do it in I guess a less scriptural way to say it is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. We are not going to solve the whole world. We have not solved the problems that led to George Floyd's killing. We've not solved Ukraine and Russia. We've certainly not solved Israel and Palestine and Gaza. Um, but you are not going to solve all those things together. You can do one thing, and what I write about in the book is how something that you do may ripple not just across the world, generations later. Generations later, you don't know who you're influencing right now and what dream you're putting in some child's mind.
And I'm going to get right into it, but I think that what you just said for teachers is so
Yes.
important because, and as as Mary Catherine hinted, I have spent the last year actually writing a book. I'll talk about it at the end of the book, at the end of our chat. But really thinking about what's going on right now. Why are teachers so slammed? Why are public schools so slammed? Why is there this fear of knowledge and this fear of what we do, and the not being able to take the time to really help kids create a safe and welcoming environment and help create the environment so that kids can critically think, they can problem solve, they can explore, they can have agency, as you and I were talking about before, confidence. And teachers end up becoming the lens, just like parents, of what kids are seeing and how to interpret what kids are seeing and what they're hearing and what they're doing. And in some ways, I think that's what you did in this book as well. You became a lens. You help us see things in ways that we might not otherwise. And I think that started with, you know, the your introduction. I mean, the introduction with being shot by a rubber bullet is quite it's quite stunning. I
In
and
America.
in America,
I mean, you talking
in
about me traveling around the
Minnesota.
world. I go to a lot of places. I have a
Yeah,
kit and a bulletproof vest and a helmet and all that stuff.
yeah.
In America is the only place I ever got shot by anybody.
Oh
I
my
mean, what a
God.
thing.
And so what, you know, so what, how was, I mean, that moment as you were covering um, the Floyd murder, how that moment was a reckoning, and I'm
Yes.
sure not just the rubber bullet, but the entire moment. Thank God you were fine,
Yeah.
but the entire moment. How was, you know, what 5 years later? Can you kind of give us a sense of how you saw the reckoning, either then or see it now, 5 years later?
And well, I'm going to start from the back side of it, the now. And that's because people say to me, the situation that we're in right now, however you wish to describe it. And I don't wish for this to be partisan. Everybody should agree that attacks on knowledge, attacks on reading, attacks on critical thinking, and attacks on democracy, it doesn't really matter where you are across the political spectrum, we're in a bad place. And people ask how it ends, and they talk about the protests. And you know, when we there were a lot of people disappointed that after this election, we didn't seem to have the energy about us that we had in 2016 or in 2020, around 2019 or whatever the case is. And I remind people that neither George Floyd nor Me Too nor the anti-apartheid movement nor the civil rights movement were actually one thing. We all think there was a catalyst. Rosa Parks didn't get up and then civil rights happened. George
Right.
Floyd got shot and then we got some reckoning. Different things catalyze different people. And in some ways, all of these things have been going on for some time. But what George Floyd's killing, and remember, it was a season of killing. There'd been a number of people, but in the immediate year or so preceding George Floyd, who had been killed by police. And as a reporter, going back a long time ago, someone gets shot by the police and is dead, and you get you put your mic in the police's face, and you ask them what happened, and they tell you what happened. They tell you this person was doing this and they were doing that, and they were a bad egg and they were coming after the police and whatever. And that's how society was built. You trust the police, and that must be the story. Well, all of a sudden, video started showing up. And lo and behold, you see people running away from the police, getting shot in the back, getting into an altercation about selling loose cigarettes and being dead. And then you saw George Floyd.
Yeah.
And you saw a young woman with a phone, holding it up to the police officer, begging him to stop. And he just looked at her, looked in the lens, and that moment of impunity,
Yeah.
that moment of impunity registered with people, white, black, young, old, Republican, Democrat, mostly mothers, who saw in that video George Floyd a man calling for his mother, because that is the humanity in us, right?
Right.
He could feel the life being snuffed out of him, and he called for his mother's help. And something transformed us. It's not that the movement got transformed. The movement to stop police brutality and racism has been going on forever. But we were transformed by the idea that we saw it, we witnessed it. We do what I do for a living, right? We bear witness to things so that you can hold power to account. But you can't hold power to account if you were never able to bear witness. Now, all of a sudden, 3-4 police killings in a row, we've seen things that didn't look like they were supposed to be. We've seen things that don't comport to the narrative that we're given. And the complexity of that moment drove people across this nation to get out in the street and say, there must be justice. And look, at its extremes, there was violence, and I witnessed it, and really horrible things. The burning down of a police station. I mean, I've never imagined such a thing. And hatred and disdain for police, which is not universally a fair thing to do. We saw moments where the police union was a complicated issue in Minneapolis. They were at odds with the police chief and what society's wills were. And the point is, all of this is complicated. But in that moment, people came together and said, complicated though it may be, there's justice and there's injustice, and I'm choosing justice. And I love the fact that we keep doing that. We don't always get justice. It doesn't always land. But in trying times, Americans and the world do tend to say, if actually pressed and given a choice, I'm going to choose justice.
Exactly right. And, as you said that, Ali, it was a student of, a public school student um, whose video
That's right.
captured it. And it
Yes.
was her teacher who
I
is
mean,
now.
just the bravery, just that
Yeah,
small
the
act of
bravery.
courage, right?
Yep.
A police officer. I mean, whether you like or you don't like police, police are symbols of authority in America, all over the world. A public school student who's telling a police officer, holding a police officer to account and recording it, that is a risk
Right.
in life.
Exactly right.
Particularly as you're seeing a police officer snuff someone's life out, that's an actual risky situation. That was more
Yep.
than a small act of courage. That was a
Yep.
big act of courage.
And she was supported by her school teacher, who happens to now be the president of the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers.
Yep.
So
That's
the linkage, the acts, the bearing witness, the having that moment, and I do think there's something, and I heard at a book at a book event for Rachel's soft cover, or her soft cover of the prequel book. I heard her
Yep.
last Friday, and she talked not only about this but so many other protests, and talked about how one of the differences, and I think we're going to get to this in terms of both Gandhi and Mandela, this notion of peaceful nonviolent protest as absolutely key to these movements being successful or not.
That's right.
But your point about how that moment in America 5 years ago, people said, regardless of where you are on all these other issues, this 7 minutes, this is not right. This is not right. And I think that's what was captured, but frankly, you captured it in your reporting as well. And I just am so grateful for that.
And one of the things, Randy, is that we have to, in the completeness of telling stories, we had to capture that these things are complicated and there are a range of responses, right? We live in a binary world where people say there
Right.
aren't two sides to whatever. You pick the issue, throw out any issue out there and say people say, well, there aren't two sides. And my response is always, we're humans. There are at least 18 to 19 sides on whatever you thought one side of the issue was. And so part of the figuring this out is going through the journey with Americans or Ukrainians or Russians or Israelis or Palestinians, going through the whole thing and saying there's a range of emotions and they mean different things to different people, but we can come together to decide eventually what justice and fairness look like. And frankly, the world left to humans, I trust, would be okay. The world left to despots and people who will manipulate us and extremists may not be okay. But there are actually more of us as humans than there are of the despots and the authoritarians and the dictators and the racists and the anti-Semites. There are more of us. And I think we have to remember that.
And I think that that's part of this whole notion of these small acts of courage coming together over and over and over again. Then you start showing each other that you are not alone. And I think that is part of the key to, I think, what Gandhi, Mandela, and if you think about any of the successful movements, whether you call it against democracy, backsliding, or for democracy,
right?
Or for progress, you see that you see those people coming together in that kind of way. Right. And I think but I want to go to how you became so sagacious on this, how you've become so smart and so supple about all of this. And that goes back to, in some ways, your own history. So I think, it's on page 55. I love this, Ali. Normally it's you who's asking me the questions.
I know. I love being asked questions. This is fantastic.
This time it's like, I just realized, oh my God, no wonder I'm a little bit nervous.
Don't be at all, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. So I think you wrote there, and I quote, "You have to ask for unreasonable outsized things to spark the world's imagination, to make people question whether a better world is even possible. And you were talking about at that point, I think, Gandhi's activism. But frankly, that description could easily apply to your family as well as to other pro democracy movements. So, would you take a moment to talk about the multi generational drive that is your family, and and how that kind of prepared you for this world where you really are, that aperture, that lens to so many of us when you're doing your reporting?
Well, like anybody who has spent any time thinking about themselves or their life, you have to give credit to those who came before you, whether you like them or not, or whether you think they did the right thing. We are creatures of our ancestors. I was writing that phrase referred to Gandhi, who at one point was in some negotiation with the British long before Indian independence, and it was captured in Richard Attenborough's film. It's a good 3.5 hour film, but it's a good history, in which the British authority says to Gandhi, "Well, you don't really expect us to just up and leave India, do you?" And Gandhi said, "Actually, eventually, that's exactly what you will do. You will up and leave India." Ridiculous. Sounded ridiculous to this guy who traveled around the world wrapped in a sheet, telling this British authority that you're going to leave one day, and they did. My grandfather was Gandhi's youngest student. And the way that came to be is that my family's from Gujarat in India, so my great-grandfather had moved to India, and Gandhi was from Gujarat in India, although they were from the rich part. Gandhi was educated in England. He was a barrister. My family were not middle class. They were, they were merchants. But they both ended up in South Africa. My family in Pretoria, Gandhi in Johannesburg. Now, anybody who's been to South Africa knows that's a 45-minute drive today. But back in the day, it was an overnight journey.
Right.
And when he came to, Gandhi would then have to negotiate with the South African government. They'd have strikes and protests. I mean, he was essentially a trade unionist, right? And so they would have these protests. The government would have to negotiate with them because their mine workers would stop working and people would, put down their tools. But when he came to Pretoria, there was nowhere to stay, because if you weren't white, you couldn't stay in a hotel. So they both had the same accountant. My great-grandfather and Gandhi shared an accountant, Gujarati-speaking fellow. And this guy said to both of them, you guys should know each other. So they became friends. And when Gandhi came to Pretoria, he would stay with my great-grandfather. So one day in 1907, he says to my great-grandfather, "The Indians are weak. They're spineless. They're just looking to make money. They do not know how to stand up to authority. They do not have the backbone to stand up to this oppressive, racist British regime." And my family were business people, so they were in the diaspora. These are people who are looking to not ruffle too many feathers. So my grandfather's listening to this guy, and Gandhi says, "I'm going to solve this. I'm going to form a commune." Called it an ashram, but an ashram is a commune. People come and live on this commune, and he was going to toughen everybody up to go to jail. So no hot water, no meat, low-calorie diet, no beds. You got 2 blankets, you slept on one, and one went on top of you, and you made all your food. That's how it was. Gandhi's telling my great-grandfather this, my great-grandfather seeming interested. Then Gandhi says, "I want your son to be my student." And my great-grandfather's like, "I don't need my son going to this rabble-rousers commune. Right? I'm just trying to make a buck." And he says to Gandhi the only thing he can think of saying. And he says, I love you, brother, but we're Muslims, and you're a Hindu. And my son's 7. I can't send him to your school. He's got to learn his religion and all this kind of stuff." So Gandhi, a Hindu, says to my great-grandfather, "I will learn your religion to teach it to him." And he did.
Wow.
And he subsequently read Jewish scripture and Christian scripture. And he already knew Hindu scripture, and he read Muslim scripture. So he became a pluralist. And my grandfather ran out of an argument. So my grandfather becomes Gandhi's youngest student at the age of 7. And he dies in 1961 at the age of 58. My grandfather does. Fully thinking he had failed. Because in 1961, apartheid was far worse than it was in 1907. In fact, it wasn't even apartheid in 1907. It was just British colonial racism. It only became apartheid in 1948. So he fully died thinking he had failed. All he wanted was not to be beaten in the street, not to have his workers beaten in the street, to have certain rights. He was not looking for outsized dreams. And then what happens? My family emigrates. My family gets to Canada. My father gets elected to Parliament. This is well beyond anything my grandfather could have imagined. And I'm
Wow.
here having this conversation with you, which in my grandfather's time would have been an illegal conversation, right? So that's my point, that I learned from my ancestors, just plant the seed. You may never eat the fruit of that tree. You may never sit in its shade. Someone will.
Right.
If my grandfather knew, maybe he knows, maybe he's watching, that I do what I do for a living, that my father was 90 years old, I guess he turned 90 a couple of weeks ago. He's a retired member of parliament, an elected person. Can you imagine? All this guy wanted was to fight for a little bit of freedom. And he got much more than he bargained for. He just didn't live to see it, unfortunately.
So how do we, that's so, I mean, look, you're just giving me chills. There's so many stories about, you know, you plant a tree, you don't see the tree's growth. And then somebody, you know, again, I don't mean to be so scriptural today. And then somebody, you know, years later has some shade from the carob tree, you know, and it's the generation to generation that
teachers, right?
Yes.
I was no noted student, trust me. I did a book event in Toronto and a couple of my high school teachers showed up and it was fantastic, but they sort of reverse know me now because I've achieved some fame, and they were always great to me. But we all remember the teacher who made us read a book, who helped us understand a solution, right? They don't know. Mrs. Plaskett, who's long departed, I knew her till the day she died. We remained friends long after high school. She had no idea how that influence was going to help me do the things that you have said very complimentarily to me that I do. Right? She had no idea that she influenced these conversations. This struggle for greater democracy was influenced by an English teacher in grade 6. But she did it.
That's kind of, I mean, it's silly. I'm not going to say we're going to try to bottle it because we can't. But that notion that starts with an imagination spark, an imagination spark, thinking about what it could be, how you spark that, and then how, you know, that life journey, which is what I think you've written about so much in terms of, so how do we create, you know, a way for others to see this? I mean, storytelling, which is what you're doing right now, but give us a sense of if you, I mean, look, you are talking to teachers. So, you know, is it our fight for autonomy in a classroom? Is it our fight for the freedom to teach? Is it hands-on learning? Is it like, think about what you know, your grandfather's story, your father's story, your story. How do we spark it in a moment like this where the government wants us to basically fears us in so many different ways and wants us to shut up?
So I think there are several answers to that on different layers, right? Like, as you know, I've got this band book club, and
which is fantastic.
You know, we're taking that fight on behalf of authors to say we will do the opposite of what people want. You want to silence people? I'll give them a platform, and my platform's pretty good. I will. And by the way, it's an actual book club. We can talk about book banning, but book banning as a topic gets boring because it's the same 5 reasons people ban books since they banned the Tyndale Bible when it first was printed in English. It's all the same stuff. But then we're talking about books. So I have viewers who are in their 70s, maybe in their 80s, well-educated, news savvy, who are not going to read George M. Johnson's book about being a queer black male. It wasn't going to cross their radar. And but now after we talk about why the book was banned, or we talk to Jodi Picoult about 19 Minutes, a book about a school shooting, which is the most banned book in America. Can you believe that? A book about a school shooting.
Yeah.
You introduce people to things that they weren't coming across, and it's actually a book club. We're talking about the book. So this gets me, it's a long way of getting back to teaching is for teaching's own sake, right? It is not on the shoulders of every teacher to fight every injustice about teaching. It is on the shoulders of every teacher to teach, to impart that wisdom, that spark.
Wait. I just want to make sure that every teacher who's listening just listen to what Ali just said. You don't have to solve every problem of the world.
Right.
Sorry.
We the rest of us in civil society will join in the fight. You and I have been talking for years about how much teachers get paid and the struggles they have. We will fight alongside people. But if you just teach, then it's on us to actually do a lot more of the fighting. And the thing to imagine as a teacher or as a journalist, imagine the world that can be.
Yeah.
And impart that to your students. The same reason we read books, right? We look into a world that can be. Whether you come from a poor background or a marginalized background and you imagine what your life can be, or you feel seen in a book, that's what teachers do, right? They do that. They make, like I said, I was nobody's notable student. Nobody said, oh, Velshi's in my class. It's going to be a banner year. But Mrs. Plaskett and others found a way to say, I can figure this kid out. I know what's going to motivate them. Not in a way that they knew would manifest 20 or 30 or 40 years down the road. Maybe I'm a little older than that, maybe even 50 years down the road. You don't know that. But what you know is you've presented somebody with a picture, an idea of what fairness can look like, what democracy can look like. Gandhi did it with the British. Martin Luther King did it with the American government. Everybody can say, here's the picture of what success looks like. Don't ask me how we're getting there right now. Don't ask me how you get there. Don't ask me for a roadmap just yet. I am just giving you a vision of what is possible. And that's the magic that teachers can impart.
So two things that I'm just from your, from these 30 some odd minutes that we've been talking, and there's a couple of questions from the audience as well. The small acts of courage, the sparking of imagination of what can be. So often we are ensconced in the world about what is, and we never get to the what can be. Right. Whether it's in our politics and often in terms of any of our worldview. And in some ways it leads to one of the audience questions, Ali, which is, what strategies do you use to recharge your energies when you feel exhausted by covering and experiencing systemic injustices?
Well, I will tell you, I have been looking forward to this conversation with you, right? You've seen when you and I talk and you walk into the studio, I get excited. When I do my show, when I'm actually interviewing people, I somehow forget the ills and the dangers of the world, and I feel in communion with my viewers and my guests. So I use the word communion because we're just throwing out a lot of religious terms today. I use the word communion deliberately because in this moment, in this world, what you need is communion, right? You need to understand that you're not alone. There are others. I have to depend on my family and my friendships more than I've ever thought I've had to depend on them. And thanks to all of them for still being around for all those years. I didn't think I needed to really lean into emotional support, but I've got an emotional support everything now, right? I've got an emotional support sister. I've got an emotional support best friend. Everybody is some kind of emotional support to me, and we must be that for each other. And you must be empathetic enough to realize, and I think this is probably substantially more natural for teachers, because why would you go into a fundamentally underpaid profession unless you actually had natural empathy for people and their needs? But we have to do that. And some of that empathy extends to people who will not understand your views, not share your views. It is a deliberate effort to find common ground with people who are somewhere else politically than you are. And that is very hard. That is very hard on some of the very difficult topics that we deal with today. But I'm doing that more and more. I'm finding a way. I'm rejecting the notion that we are tribal. I'm just going to reject that, whether it's religion or culture or skin color or language. I am just not going to agree to that. I'm going to decide we're a human race. And I talk about teachers and I talk about Mrs. Plaskett a lot, but I talk about Mr. Chawla. He was my accounting teacher. I was never going to be an accountant, by the way. I was terrible in that class too. But I am a child of Indian immigrant, Indian ancestors.
I was going to say you're a pretty good business reporter.
Well, Mr. Chawla will be pleased to have heard that happened, but he sparked an interest in numbers and accounting, which I didn't have. Mm-hmm. And it could be somebody who sparks an interest in engineering, which something you didn't have, or in biology, something I didn't have. That's my point, is that if you're a child in school, you are a blank slate. Now, there's a whole lot of nonsense coming at you from social media. Um, and so teachers probably need to be more of a counter to that than they were when I was a kid, because there was nothing else. When I was a kid, it was school and it was not school. Now it's school and everything else that could possibly be competing for your attention. But social media batters people. It beats people down. It beats kids down. One day we're all going to realize this, that it's mostly a mess. It's got some benefits, but it's mostly a mess. That teacher builds you up. That teacher makes you understand something about yourself you didn't know. Could I have been an accountant? Now I could have been, because that man took enough interest in me to suggest that I might have had some aptitude. I didn't end up as an accountant, but I did, as you remember. Most people maybe not know this on this call. I'm a business journalist. Most of my career has been as an economics journalist. I was not in politics and global affairs. I reported on business for a very long time, because that guy made me understand something about numbers that I didn't think I would naturally understand. That's what we can do for each other today. We can make each other understand the possibilities. Teachers can do it for students, and we as humans can just do it for each other.
I have two more questions that I want to ask you before I know we're going to end, in about 15 minutes or so, and I've been taking some of the audience questions as well. But I just, you and I have talked a lot about what schooling should be. And as you know, I have really moved to thinking about schooling as it should be safe and welcoming. It should be engaging and relevant. The hands-on experiences that kids have, experiential learning, whether it be in civics or whether it be in career tech ed, to me, as I think that these are the most important kinds of experiences. And they also compete with social media, which is what we have to do these days. We're competing with kids' attention elsewhere in so many different ways. And I think that notion of how we engage in a real fundamental way and how we find that common ground and really kind of change the way in which we're thinking to find that common ground instead of being tribal is really important. I use the word community a lot. I'm going to start using the word communion a lot. And I think
at least on Sundays.
At least on Sundays, or sometimes on Saturdays. Yeah. But I think you actually said this, as you were describing Ismaili Muslims, and when you said on page 121, I love this paragraph. The myth of the American dream is that of the self-made man, the idea that individuals can and should lift themselves up by their own bootstraps. Ismailis, I hope I said that correctly, like Mormons and Jews and Catholics, know that bootstrapping only really works as a community effort with the strong lifting up the weak, the experience reaching out to the new, and everyone rowing in the same direction.
Yep. And I feel very, very deeply and strongly about that. And listen, as I said, I'm a business journalist. I've interviewed startup CEOs. I love entrepreneurship. I understand why America's better at it than most countries are. I love the fact that you can make a lot of money with a better mousetrap. I'm a capitalist. I'm all of these things. I'm also a very pro-union guy, as you know, because I didn't grow up in a world where those things were in opposition to one another. But part of the reason, and I remember my father explaining this to me when I was a little kid about politics, is that you can do that. You can be a person who supports entrepreneurship and business and free enterprise and capital. But why do you need unions? Because people need protection. People need to be linked together to protect themselves against interests that are stronger than they are. Now, my father must have told me this when I was 10 years old. That was before the world of oligarchy, before the world in which a CEO earns, I don't know how many hundreds of times the salary of a worker, before even teacher salaries were as disparate from median salaries as they are now. So the idea that we can all overcome everything as long as you just put your mind to it is a little bit of BS, right? We all have the potential and capability to overcome everything, but there are people whose thumbs are on your scale or on your neck or on your back, and we need each other to say, get out of their way. This person needs to achieve something, and you are standing in their way with your policies, with your practices. That's what we have to help each other with. It's your job, Randi, to be the best Randi that you can be, and my job to be the best Ali I can be. But it's our job to make sure that you are able to live up to your potential, and that's what is unequal about our society. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Every individual cannot solve all their own problems. We need a way in which we level the playing field so that every individual has an opportunity to solve their own problems. Which, by the way, is that not what public school is? If nothing
Exactly
else,
right.
it is a place where you come in and you are given the ability to level out the playing field so that when you graduate, you can go on and make decisions about your life. Because without education, someone else makes decisions for you, or you're working too early in your life and you get stuck in something you didn't know you were going to get into. So education gives people choice and potential to live up to the best they can be. That's sort of my attitude, that we must be in community as much as we must be individuals who strive for the best.
And it's interesting that you say that, because if you think about the sources of power for regular people, let me take the United States, since I know the system better than the others. You may know Canada I think you know Canada as well as you know the United States. But in the US, the three real ways that regular folks have that kind of power, create that kind of agency, is education, which is communal, a labor movement, which is communal, and frankly, voting, which is communal. In some ways,
you hit
know,
the nail on all three heads.
Yeah, and those are the three ways in a democracy that you create any kind of power for yourselves and your family. And how
yet,
you
in all three cases, look through history. It's not that dissimilar in Canada, except we got stronger social protections in Canada than in the United States. But in all three cases, all of those things are things that you can take for granted, right? You take for granted that public education is available to you. So you may not think about it, certainly as a student, you may not be thinking about it as the gift that it is. You take for granted, if you have a certain job that is unionized, that you're a member of the union. You might actually look at it as, why are they taking this cut of my paycheck? And you take for granted that you have a vote. You don't look at the percentage of people who vote. We're clearly taking this for granted. I don't know, 70, I don't know what the numbers are, but some 80 million people voted for Harris and 80 million people voted for Donald Trump, roughly about the same. 90 million people didn't vote.
Correct.
90 million people who are eligible to vote did not vote. Can you talk about imagining possibilities? Imagine the possibility if those 90 million people voted. I would argue anything is a possibility if those 90 million. They actually could have found a third candidate and elected them.
Exactly right.
But it's just for possibility. It's just we limit ourselves because we think X has happened. So whether it's voting, whether it's organized labor, whether it's public education, we must live in a world where none of us take any of this for granted. And if you send your kid to a private school, a charter school, good for you. You have to remember that the public education system is actually what holds our society up. So you do what you need to do, but we need to actually fund this system properly so that everybody's got that equality of opportunity, because we don't all have the chance to go to the fanciest school in the fanciest zip codes. I was not that. Not only was it not a chance, it wasn't even a thing growing up. Like, that wasn't even a consideration. You went to a public school because that's what you actually did. That's how you were prepared for life. It wasn't even a different discussion.
You're getting a lot of hearts on that answer. I mean, I think, it's so let me, before I ask you my last question, that is essentially what I've spent the last year writing, which is, what creates, and I've been I've been thinking a lot about King's last book, Chaos versus Community, and the questions he asked, and King, like many of the founders of American democracy, who actually base their views on much more Locke than even Rousseau or Hobbes, in terms of thinking about the social contract and thinking about that you can only really create a democracy if you have education, because a democracy can only really work if people are empowered with knowledge and with a civitas, or with a civic engagement. And you're really only going to have civic engagement if you have knowledge. And so whether it was Franklin or Roosevelt or King or Madison, they all come down to, we absolutely have to have. Now, they didn't believe that everyone should have public education, But that nub, that kernel, that's what pluralism is. And in some ways,
Yes.
I think you're right that regardless of whether you send your kids to public schools or not, if you don't have a system that is pluralistic in mind and that actually tries to
Correct.
create and envision what we need to do for the next generation, what we need to
Yes.
do to think about the what kids need to know and be able to learn and do in a
Yes.
world of AI. That's
Yes.
that's that system that is so fundamentally integrated with democracy, and that's probably
Right.
why it gets vilified so much, because it creates the power of freedom of
100%.
thought.
And I'll give you two quick examples. I was just telling you about my dad, who's just turned 90. My parents watch my show every week. It's a little weird because if I'm off work, my mom will text me, "What's wrong?" I said, "Mom, I'm a man in his mid-50s. Like most people's parents don't check on them about when they're not at work. They watch every show." And 3 years ago, when I did my first banned book club, my father texted me generally after every show, and he said, "I didn't know there were public libraries until I left South Africa
Wow.
because non-white people were not." He doesn't know. Maybe there were libraries for white people. He doesn't know. Like they were not. He certainly was not entitled to go to one. But South Africa, apartheid, they did two things. Black people were not encouraged to learn English. They were only encouraged to learn Afrikaans because it was very limited language. If you only spoke Afrikaans and you didn't speak English, you definitely weren't leaving South Africa to go work somewhere else. But they made a dictionary for black people who were only supposed to be service-oriented workers, right? So it was literally a dictionary so that you could learn enough words to understand how to be a gardener or a servant in the house or whatever the case is. They actually created a secondary system. It wasn't just substandard. It wasn't just that the schools were worse, because we're used to that in the developed world, right? Where all public school is not equal. They literally developed a separate and uniquely unequal education system, which again we did see in the United States, right? There were prevention of the book banning is novel to many of us. It's not novel to a whole lot of people who grew up in the Jim Crow South, right? There were
Yeah,
just some books that were not available to people in certain areas, that were not areas that didn't have libraries. Knowledge is power. End of story. And in
exactly.
a forgetting the economic argument that we're in a low unemployment world and we actually have to educate everybody we can educate at whatever level appropriate, just this idea that knowledge is power. They banned the first book I can find that was banned was, I said, the Tyndale Bible, because they published the Bible in the English language in Great Britain. The church did not want people reading the Bible because, God forbid, you read the Bible, you come up with your own ideas. The ideas
Right.
had to come from the church. So that's the first book that was banned, and nothing has changed since. You ban
Yeah,
books for the same reason. You fight knowledge for the
exactly.
same reason, because if you can make an argument, I lose.
And that is, and so for all those wondering why I keep on saying, I've been doing this on top of my other job for the last year, is because I just wrote a book that's called Why Fascists Fear Teachers. And it will be out in September. It is going to be, it's on, people can pre order it now. It was just announced this week. But it really trying to answer the question, why is there such a fear of knowledge, of science? This country, the innovation here, is based upon science. It's based upon
Correct.
knowledge. It's based
We should love
upon,
it.
exactly. It should be unleashed, not
Yes.
banned, not feared. And what I think we're seeing, this is this week, the week of the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, the week of the anniversary where we said separate but equal is not equal. You're seeing a huge, that is, and you and I have talked about it, that is the huge shift in America right now. The
Yep.
assault, I mean, many other shifts, but the assault on knowledge, the assault on universities, the assault on public schooling, the fragmentation, the
Yep.
defunding, the culture wars. And it is this fear, in some ways, a fear of the future. In some ways, it's a fear of our children. Our children are
You
going to
know,
be a whole lot
you
better and more, and if we help give them the tools that they need so that they can envision a future, imagine, to use your word, a better future.
So the experts that I talk to, of which you are one, on this idea of fascism, they all have this word. I'm not very good with languages, but it's a German word that was used in the 30s in Germany to describe coordination. Right? Hitler succeeded on the basis of coordination, which is really a euphemism for all ideas being ideas that were
Right.
created and spread by the government. Free thinking was actually determined to be the enemy of coordination. Right? Coordination means you don't think on your own, you don't plan on your own. We
Right.
tell you what to say. The curriculum will come from us. The readings will come from us. Mussolini did it. It actually led to the Rwandan genocide. It's all evil comes from the idea that free and critical thinking is unavailable to people.
Exactly.
It's the root of all of these things. People say it's ethnic this and it's Sunnis and Shias and it's Jews and Muslims. It's not. It's actually it's people who are given ideas, who have them lodged in their head, and who have no ability to accept critical thinking and say, "Hey, let me challenge that idea. I've thought this all my life." And that's the beauty of your and my jobs, right? We are out there amongst people, talking to people, hearing their stories all the time. And at some
Exactly.
point, unless you're a knucklehead with rocks in your brain, someone else's opinion or idea is going to penetrate, and you're going to say, either I really disagree with that and I'm going to have to argue with them, or I'm going to rethink my own opinion, or I'm going to learn to debate, which is another skill that
Exactly.
you learn in school. Right?
Exactly right.
We cannot accept coordination. The government does not tell you what to read. The government does not tell you what to learn.
No, and we have to, as teachers, we have to teach kids how to think. And we have to teach kids critical thinking and problem solving. I mean, I keep saying we have to teach in this new age 4 things: critical thinking, problem solving, resilience, and all the relational and empathy skills, including,
Yes,
and
and
so,
that
but
last one is really important. The
yes,
relational, because society works against that, and social media works
exactly.
against that, and the bubbles created even on cable news. I mean, I would like to end my career improving some of that situation, but we've all contributed to this idea that you live in your own little bubble. We have to break that.
Right. And I love that when you said earlier on, we got to break the tribal sense that we are in.
Yeah.
So that gets me to the last question comment, which is something you said around page 230, which was something like, I think that if we are worried about democracy dying, and I am worried about that, it will be saved by people like my sister. So, I mean, I think I know what you are about to say, but why don't you explain why you said that?
So first of all, I was very worried that my sister was either going to love this book, or she was never going to speak to me again. She was either going to feel very seen or not at all. And it was, fortunately, felt very seen. My sister is not would not be outwardly as political as I am. You would not glean from talking to her what her political views are. I know because she's been my sister all my life. They're probably very dissimilar to my own. But she has run for office. But she's a civil servant. She was out on strike last year. Actually, there was a massive civil service strike in Canada, the biggest one in Canadian history. And she was out there, and my parents were on a text group, were encouraging her, and she was showing her her signs. But ultimately, my sister is one of those people in the world who gets things done. Right? She worked for a city councilor, and they would find out there were too many incidents of people getting struck at an intersection, so she'd be the one who would get the traffic light put up. And it's a full circle story, because my great grandfather, the one who sat with Gandhi and got my grandfather to go to his school, was killed. I think it was in his 90s, very healthy, because he got hit by a bus.
Mm.
And my mother, ironically, who was a child at the time, wasn't my mother, wasn't married to my father, witnessed it. She watched him walk across the street, and he got hit by a bus and died. And it's full circle that if my great grandfather lived in a fair society where someone like my sister was there, they would have understood there needed to be a traffic signal at that intersection, and she would have got the traffic signal done. And no one will ever know my sister's name. And she's not known for anything. She's a candidate, and people in her constituency knew her. But the point of this is that it's not guys like me who talk on TV and say big things and have big messages and sometimes get awards for it. It's people more like teachers. My sister falls into that category.
Right.
Unsung heroes. I don't want to swear, but that was the title of the chapter: people who get shit done. That's who is going to save society.
I love that. And I think, I wanted to end with that just because, again, you can hear, I mean, I just, I mean, you see how much I just adore you. But this
Feeling
whole
is mutual.
the whole conversation, Ali, about the whole notion of from small acts of courage to weaving in your history and your family's history, the fight against evil, and the kind of then using politics to make things better, and being in public service to make things better. That
Right.
from this, that is the story of how we try to create a better life for people. And that's what every single teacher does. And that's why many of us are involved in the trade union movement, but that's why many of us are journalists as well. And a sense
Yeah.
of hope in the future, and being able to, instead of to break coordination through
Yes.
collaboration and through
That's
critical thinking.
That's right.
And
And again,
so,
the good news is it's actually your job. Like that's the great
yeah,
part about it, right? That
exactly right.
as a teacher, doing your job every day actually simply improves society, not just today, but in my case, 30, 40, 50 years into the future.
Amazing. And thank you so much for telling that story. And I think you've, so we've just, I'm just really grateful for being able to have this hour with you. And, we tape these book clubs so that people can, see them and listen to them when they want. But I just want to just say one more time before I announce, or maybe let me announce this first. We have two events this week coming up. This is what, Kelly wanted me to announce. We have with Erica Chenoweth, we're finally doing it. We didn't want to do this immediately. Like we work with Tim Snyder, we work with Jason Stanley, we work with Ruth Ben-Ghiat. We wanted to finally have a session on authoritarianism. So on Tuesday night, May 20th, we're going to have one of these webinars, which is called How to Stop a Backsliding Democracy in Its Tracks, How to Engineer a Reverse Course. And we're going to have Erica Chenoweth, Ivan Marovic, and Reverend Dr. Elisa Gould with me doing that one. And we're also going to have one the day before with Vin Gupta. Vin and we are doing these kind of vital lessons every month now, where we're trying, because there's nothing scientific coming out of health and human services, we're trying to actually create some way of people getting scientific information. So we're doing that every month as well. So we as a union are trying to take on this kind of education of our own members, in the absence of the government doing what it should be doing right now. So I want to say, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Catherine and Kelly so they can put all the slides up. But I want to say, as we say goodbye, it's just been such a fantastic hour. And the book, for everybody who has not yet read it, Small Acts of Courage by Ali Velshi, you've got a sense of what he, the beautiful prose and the amazing stories that he's written from his own life experience. And it is really a love story to the potential of what we can be as a society based upon what he knows and what we know. And so if you haven't read it yet, please read it. And Ali, thank you so much.
Thank you, Randy. I really am honored that you would invite me, and thank you to everybody who attended this, and thank you for your great question.
Thank you. Back to you, Mary Catherine.
Thank you so much, Randy and Ali. That hour flew by, as I was pretty sure it was going to. Thank you both for just an incredible conversation. It was both so personal. I just saw so many, emojis, deeply appreciating the personal stories you were telling and the affection you have for teachers and the teaching profession. It came through loud and clear. We're incredibly grateful. I would also love to point everyone to the chat one more time. There is a link there if you would like to see the announcement that Randi made this week about her book coming out, Why Fascists Fear Teachers. And there are links to order it from your favorite unionized, hopefully, bookshop and other local independent sellers and others. And then those 2 other events coming up, you'll see that one incredible continuation of the work the Share My Lesson and AFT are doing with Vin Gupta, Vital Lessons, a town hall on perimenopause, menopause, and what you need to know. And then that is Monday. And then on Tuesday, how to stop a backsliding democracy in its tracks and engineer a reverse course. Randi is going to be joined by Erica Chenoweth, Yvonne Marovic, and Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould. It is going to be an incredible conversation. We're looking forward to seeing you back at both of those conversations this week and at our next AFT Book Club. Thank you, Ali and Randi. Appreciate it. And take care.
And Mary Catherine, we also put up in the chat how you can order Ali's book, right?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
So if you have not had the chance to order Small Acts of Courage yet, we do have a link to that as well. Highly recommend it. You will be really glad that you shared some time with Ali Velshi in his book, Small Acts of Courage.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mary Catherine. Thank you, Ali Velshi. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Kelly Booz. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.